There are decisions that reshape a life in the span of a heartbeat. For Cole Sullivan, that heartbeat arrived at 5:47 on a freezing October morning when his calloused fingers closed around a frosted glass door handle and pushed forward into territory he had no business entering. The emergency call had jolted him awake 20 minutes earlier, voice crackling through cheap speakers, with a kind of urgency that meant someone important was inconvenienced. Electrical failure on the executive floor. Immediate response required. Cole had rolled out of bed in the Dorchester apartment he'd occupied for 9 years, the same cramped two-bedroom where every pipe groan and neighbor argument bled through walls thin as cardboard. Lily stirred in the next room as he dressed, 9 years old and perceptive beyond any measure fairness should allow a child who'd never known her mother. He paused at her doorway, watching the rise and fall of blankets decorated with horses she'd begged for last Christmas. The stuffed rabbit he'd found at Goodwill clutched against her chest like a talisman against the world's indifference. Eleanor Hayes answered her door before Cole finished knocking, the 70-year-old neighbor who'd become their lifeline through 1,000 mornings exactly like this one. She asked no questions, simply nodded and shuffled past him toward Lily's room, her slippers whispering against hardwood that had seen better decades. Bosau Lovai? Lily's voice drifted through the pre-dawn stillness, Vietnamese words she'd learned from a classmate and deployed whenever she sensed her father's emotional barricades rising. Kom ko zido con? Just work, sweetie. The lie tasted familiar, worn smooth by repetition. He was halfway to the door when her next question landed. You look scared, Bo. Cole forced brightness into his voice that convinced neither of them. Big building, important people. I'll be home before you notice I'm gone. The bus rumbled through streets where Boston was just beginning its daily resurrection. Coffee shops flickered to life behind steamed windows. Delivery trucks groaned through intersections. Other people stumbled toward obligations they'd made peace with, or hadn't, and Cole wondered how many carried the same weight he did, the sensation of drowning in slow motion, while everyone around you commented on what a nice day it was for swimming. Thornton Technologies rose 63 stories into the pre-dawn sky, all steel and glass ambition that seemed designed specifically to remind people like Cole of their proper place in the universe's hierarchy. He'd worked there 3 years, first in the basement with pipes and HVAC systems, gradually earning his way up to general maintenance, when someone noticed he actually understood electrical theory rather than just following color-coded diagrams. The freight elevator carried him upward with mechanical indifference, numbers climbing past floors where he'd fixed toilets and replaced light bulbs, and made himself invisible to people whose annual bonuses exceeded his lifetime earnings. 23 stories felt like ascending into atmosphere too thin for someone with community college on his resume and MIT dropout stamped across his truncated transcript. The executive floor at this hour possessed the eerie silence of spaces designed for power, but temporarily abandoned by it. His work boots echoed across marble polished to mirror brightness. Abstract paintings that probably cost more than Lily's entire education glared from walls. Everything whispered the same message: you don't belong here. The work order directed him to the CEO's private wing, separated from the main executive area by frosted glass and brass fixtures that managed to suggest both transparency and absolute barrier. Lights throughout the section had failed, leaving only emergency exit signs casting green purgatory across expensive furniture. Cole found the electrical panel behind a door so seamlessly integrated into mahogany paneling he'd have missed it without the building schematic on his tablet. The panel revealed its failure immediately. Tripped breaker, probably from a surge during the night. Simple fix, 5 minutes of work. He reset the breaker and heard the satisfying hum of electricity finding its path again. Finally, what took so long? The voice came from somewhere deeper in the wing, female and sharp with the particular frustration of someone unaccustomed to waiting for anything. Cole's stomach clenched. He'd assumed the floor would be empty this early, that he'd have the space to himself. Just needed to reset the breaker, ma'am. Everything should be working now. I'll test the switches to confirm. Do it quickly. I have a press conference in 2 hours, and I need to change. He moved through the reception area, testing each switch with methodical thoroughness. Lights responded perfectly, flooding the space with illumination that made the artwork glow and the marble gleam. 2 doors stood open. The third, constructed of frosted glass that turned everything behind it into soft shadows, remained closed. One switch remained by that frosted barrier, a master control that likely operated the office lights. Cole flipped it, heard the click of response, and reached for the door handle. Instinct born from 3 years of checking and testing and verifying. His hand was on the glass, pushing inward, before his brain registered what he was doing. The door swung open. Vivian Thornton stood in the center of her office, frozen in the act of pulling a fresh blouse from a garment bag hanging on the back of her chair. She wore a black skirt and nothing else above the waist except a bra, so delicate it seemed constructed from expensive breath and good intentions. Her mahogany hair fell in waves across bare shoulders. Dark eyes went wide with shock that perfectly mirrored the horror flooding through Cole's entire nervous system. Time compressed into something dense and terrible, her skin pale against dark fabric, the curve of her collarbone, the vulnerability of exposure in someone who'd built an empire on never showing weakness. The tool bag slipped from Cole's fingers and hit the marble floor with a sound like a gunshot echoing through a cathedral. "I'm sorry." The words tumbled out in desperate cascade. "I'm so sorry, Miss Thornton. I was just testing the lights. I didn't know you were here. I didn't mean to." "Get out." 2 words spoken quietly, but carrying enough ice to freeze the Charles River solid. Cole stumbled backwards so fast he nearly tripped over his own boots, his face burning with humiliation that felt like standing too close to a furnace. "I'm sorry. I thought it was empty. I was checking the switches. Please, I have a daughter. I need this job. I'm so sorry." "Turn around." The command stopped him mid-retreat. Cole spun so fast his vision blurred, facing the frosted glass in the reception area beyond. Behind him came the whisper of fabric, the sharp zip of the garment bag. Every muscle in his body locked rigid, waiting for security guards or termination or whatever punishment fit the crime of seeing what he'd seen. "I swear I didn't see anything." His voice cracked like thin ice under weight. "I swear I was just doing my job, testing circuits. I didn't know you were in here. Please, I have a 9-year-old daughter. Lily. I'm raising her alone. I need this job. I can't afford to lose." "Be quiet." Cole's jaw snapped shut. He could hear his own breathing, ragged and panicked, and beneath it the soft sounds of Vivian dressing. Seconds stretched into small eternities. His entire body felt like a live wire, crackling with fear and shame. "What's your name?" "Sullivan. Cole Sullivan, ma'am. Maintenance staff, electrical clearance. I've worked here 3 years. I've never had a complaint. I swear this was an accident. I thought the office was empty. I was just—" "I heard you the first time." Silence fell again, heavy with implications Cole couldn't begin to parse. When she finally spoke, her voice carried something underneath he couldn't quite identify. Something that wasn't anger, but felt equally dangerous. "You can turn around now." Cole turned slowly, keeping his eyes fixed on the floor. Vivian Thornton stood behind her desk, now fully dressed in a cream blouse and the same black skirt. Her hair was pulled back in the severe style he recognized from the single glimpse he'd caught of her months ago in the lobby. All traces of vulnerability erased, replaced by the polished armor of someone who commanded rooms full of people 3 times her age. "Look at me, Mr. Sullivan." Meeting her gaze felt like the hardest thing Cole had ever done. Harder than dropping out of MIT with 1 year remaining. Harder than holding newborn Lily in the hospital while Jessica's abandonment letter crinkled in his pocket. But Vivian deserved that much. An acknowledgement of what he'd done, an acceptance of whatever judgment she was about to deliver. Her face was unreadable, a mask of perfect control. But something flickered in those dark eyes as she studied him. something more complicated than simple anger. "You really didn't know I was here?" It wasn't a question, but Cole answered anyway. "No, ma'am, I swear. The work order just said electrical malfunction on the executive floor. I reset the breaker and I was testing all the switches. I thought the whole floor was empty this early." His hands were shaking. He clenched them into fists at his sides, knuckles white with the effort of holding himself together. "I understand if you need to fire me. I understand this is. I don't have any excuse. I just want you to know it was an accident. I would never deliberately—" "Stop talking." Cole stopped. Vivian walked around her desk with measured steps, heels clicking on hardwood floor. She stopped 3 feet away from him, close enough that he could smell her perfume, something subtle and expensive that made the air between them feel charged with electricity his multimeter could never measure. "You're terrified right now." It was an observation delivered with genuine curiosity rather than satisfaction. "Yes, ma'am. Of me or of losing your job?" "Both." The truth fell out before he could stop it. "Mostly of losing my job. I have Lily, she's 9. I'm all she has. I can't." His voice cracked and he forced himself to breathe. "I can't afford to lose this." Something shifted in Vivian's expression, recognition passing across her face like a cloud shadow over water. She studied him for another long moment, and Cole felt catalogued, assessed, measured against criteria he couldn't begin to understand. The door was unlocked. "I should have secured it. That's on me, not you." Cole blinked, certain he'd heard wrong. "Ma'am, you were doing your job, testing the electrical system. I was careless." He heard her take a measured breath. "What you saw stays between us. Understood?" "Yes, ma'am, absolutely. I would never say anything to anyone. I swear on—" "Good." She turned away, moving back to her desk with that same controlled grace. "Finish your testing and leave. Send your supervisor a report that everything's functioning normally." Cole stood, rooted to the spot, unable to process what was happening. She wasn't firing him. She wasn't even yelling. He'd braced for disaster and instead found something he didn't have a name for, something that felt almost like understanding. "Ma'am," the word emerged before he could stop it. "I really am sorry, truly." Vivian looked up from her tablet, and for just a second her mask slipped. What he saw underneath wasn't anger or ice or any of the things he'd expected. It was exhaustion, the kind of bone-deep weariness that recognized itself in another person. "I know you are. Now go." Cole grabbed his tool bag and fled, his legs unsteady as he escaped the office. He tested the remaining switches with shaking hands, documented everything on his tablet, and made it to the freight elevator before his knees threatened to give out. He leaned against the cool metal wall, heart still racing, trying to understand what had just happened. She'd let him go. She'd seen his terror, heard his desperation about Lily, and she'd chosen mercy over the punishment he deserved. The question followed him all the way back to the basement, through the morning's remaining work orders, through the mechanical routine of fixing broken things, while his mind spun in circles, trying to make sense of a universe where powerful people showed compassion to maintenance workers who stumbled into their private moments. 2 days crawled past. Cole reported for his shifts, kept his head down, and tried to convince himself the incident was behind him. The executive floor might as well have existed in another dimension. He fixed a leaking pipe on the 4th floor, replaced fluorescent tubes in a conference room, unclogged a drain in the cafeteria. Invisible work for invisible people. Exactly the way his life had been designed. Then on Thursday afternoon, his phone buzzed with a message that made his stomach drop through the floor. HR requesting immediate meeting. 4th floor, suite 400. Patricia Kemp's name at the bottom like a signature on a termination notice. Cole made it through the rest of his shift on autopilot, tools moving through familiar motions while his mind constructed and demolished 1,000 scenarios. They decided to fire him, after all. Probably wanted to do it officially, with paperwork and witnesses, everything documented so he couldn't claim wrongful termination when he couldn't afford a lawyer anyway. The HR suite occupied space decorated in neutral colors and uncomfortable furniture designed to make difficult conversations slightly less awful. Patricia Kemp waited in a conference room, 50-ish and professional in a gray pantsuit, a folder on the table before her like evidence at a trial. "Mr. Sullivan, please sit down." Cole sat, hands gripping his knees. "If this is about Monday morning, I can explain. I didn't mean to." "This isn't disciplinary, Mr. Sullivan." Patricia opened the folder and slid a document across the table. "This is a position transfer." The words didn't make sense. Cole stared at the paper, trying to force his brain to process what he was seeing. "Effective immediately, you're being reassigned from general maintenance to executive floor technical lead. It's a permanent position with a significant salary increase and enhanced benefits package." Cole's vision blurred. The numbers on the page swam in and out of focus. 36,000 to 78,000 annually, nearly double his current salary. Health insurance that covered dependents, which meant Lily's dental work she'd needed since last year. The braces that would cost $4,000 he didn't have. "I don't understand." His voice sounded like it was coming from underwater. "I thought, there must be some mistake. I'm just..." The position was created based on a recommendation from Ms. Thornton herself. Patricia consulted her notes with the careful precision of someone reading from a script. She indicated that the executive floor requires dedicated technical support with electrical expertise and, she paused meaningfully, demonstrated discretion and reliability under pressure. "Ms. Thornton recommended me." The words came out strangled, disbelieving. "That's correct. The salary details are on page 2. You'll also receive comprehensive health insurance covering dependents, which I understand is relevant given your daughter's situation." Patricia's professional demeanor softened slightly. "This is a good opportunity, Mr. Sullivan. The executive floor position comes with better hours, better benefits, and direct exposure to company leadership. If you perform well, it could open doors you haven't considered." Doors. The word felt foreign on Cole's tongue, like a language he'd studied but never spoken. He looked down at the numbers again, at the benefits package that would transform Lily's life from constant struggle into something approaching stability. Better hours meant picking her up from school instead of relying on Eleanor's kindness. Health insurance meant getting her the dental work and the checkups he'd been postponing because co-pays added up faster than his paychecks. It was, do you accept the position or not? What choice did he have? What choice had he ever had since the moment Jessica walked out of that hospital room 9 years ago, leaving him holding a 3-day-old infant and a note that read, "I'm sorry, this isn't the life I want." "Yes, I accept." "Excellent. Report to the executive floor tomorrow at 7 a.m. Catherine Walsh will orient you to your new responsibilities." Patricia stood, signaling the meeting's conclusion. "Mr. Sullivan, Miss Thornton doesn't make recommendations lightly. She saw something in you worth cultivating. I suggest you prove her right." That evening, alone in his apartment after Lily had fallen asleep clutching the stuffed rabbit that had seen better days, Cole pulled out his phone and did something he'd never bothered with before. He searched through his work emails until he found a message from 3 weeks ago, forwarded from his supervisor, Tom. A request from Catherine Blake, Vivian's executive assistant, asking for maintenance records on electrical work for floors 12 through 20. The timestamp was 2 weeks before the frosted door incident. He opened his personnel file through the company intranet, something he'd never thought to check. Last access by V. Thornton, the log showed. Date, 3 weeks ago. She'd been looking at his file before he ever walked into her office. Before the accident that should have ended his career. Before everything. Cole sat back against the couch that sagged in all the wrong places, his mind racing. The incident hadn't been the catalyst. It had been something else. Something that happened before he ever saw her vulnerable and exposed. He rewound through those weeks, trying to remember anything unusual, any interaction with executives or situations that might have drawn attention. Then it surfaced, sharp and clear. Maintenance call on floor 15, 2 weeks before the frosted door. He'd been troubleshooting a complex HVAC failure, teaching a junior technician named Derek Rodriguez how to diagnose sensor feedback loops. It had taken 3 hours of patient explanation, drawing diagrams, making sure the kid understood not just what to do, but why it mattered. They'd been deep in the mechanical room when Cole had glanced up and seen a figure in the hallway. Just a shadow, really. Someone watching through the half-open door. He'd assumed it was building management doing rounds and dismissed it. But what if it had been her? What if Vivian Thornton had been watching him work, listening to him teach, seeing something in that moment that made her pull his file and consider him for a position that didn't even exist yet? And then the incident happened, and instead of being the disaster that ended his career, it became a test he didn't know he was taking. A test of discretion under pressure, of character revealed in crisis. Cole pulled up the acceptance email Patricia had sent and read through the job description again. Executive floor technical lead, responsible for all electrical, HVAC, and general facilities systems. Primary location, 23rd floor. Report directly to Catherine Walsh with priority response to executive wing requests. Start Monday morning, Patricia had said. 7 a.m. at the executive reception desk. Ms. Thornton's assistant will brief you on protocols and expectations. 3 days. He had 72 hours before he stepped into a world where Vivian Thornton would be a constant presence instead of a distant, terrifying legend. 3 days to figure out how to be invisible to someone who'd already seen right through him. Monday morning arrived with the weight of inevitability. Cole stood outside Thornton Technologies at 6:45, watching his reflection waver in the glass facade, like a ghost uncertain of its own existence. The new badge felt heavy in his pocket, a small piece of plastic that somehow represented the distance between who he'd been last week and who he was supposed to become today. He dropped Lily at school early, endured her questions about why he looked so nervous, promised they'd celebrate his new position with pizza Friday night. She'd hugged him extra tight before running to join her friends, and the warmth of that small body against his chest was the only thing keeping him from turning around and walking away from opportunity he didn't deserve. The executive floor at 7 in the morning hummed with controlled energy that felt nothing like the silent space he'd encountered during the emergency call. Assistants arranged schedules. Junior executives clutched coffee like it contained the meaning of life. The soft ping of elevator arrivals delivered the day's first wave of ambition and anxiety in expensive suits. Cole felt immediately, overwhelmingly out of place. A maintenance worker in navy blue surrounded by tailored fabric and clicking heels, carrying a tool bag that had seen better years, while everyone else gripped leather briefcases and tablets that probably cost more than his monthly rent. The reception desk curved along one wall like something from a spaceship, all blonde wood and embedded screens that suggested technology had achieved sentience and decided to become furniture. The woman behind it looked up as he approached, her smile professional but not unkind. Cole Sullivan, I'm supposed to report here for executive floor technical support. Yes, we've been expecting you, Mr. Sullivan. I'm Jennifer. You'll be working primarily with me for coordination. Mrs. Thornton's executive assistant, Catherine Walsh, will brief you on protocols shortly. She's just finishing with the morning briefing. Jennifer gestured toward a seating area that looked like it belonged in a modern art gallery. Cole perched on the edge of a chair that probably cost more than his security deposit, his tool bag resting between his boots. Around him, the executive floor continued its choreographed dance of people moving with purpose, conversations happening in low tones that suggested everything discussed was confidential and crucial. Mr. Sullivan, Cole stood quickly, nearly knocking over his tool bag. The woman who'd spoken was in her mid-40s, impeccably dressed in charcoal gray, with sharp eyes that assessed him in a single glance and came to conclusions he wasn't sure he wanted to know. "I'm Catherine Walsh, Ms. Thornton's executive assistant. Follow me, please." She moved through the corridors with the confidence of someone who could navigate these hallways asleep, heels clicking against marble in a rhythm that suggested military precision. Cole followed, acutely aware of how his work boots sounded by comparison, each step announcing his presence like an intrusion rather than an arrival. They passed through the main executive area into a corridor Cole recognized from his emergency call, the path to Vivian's private wing. His pulse quickened despite himself, muscle memory of terror and shame still fresh enough to taste. Catherine led him to a small office he hadn't noticed during his first visit, tucked discreetly near the electrical panel he'd repaired. It was modest by executive floor standards, but palatial compared to the basement break room where he usually left his things. A desk with an actual computer, built-in cabinets for equipment, and most impossibly, a window that showed the city below instead of concrete walls and fluorescent tubes. "This is your workspace. You'll maintain all systems on this floor, with priority given to Miss Thornton's immediate area. Response time for her requests is 10 minutes maximum. All other issues should be resolved within the hour unless they require parts or outside contractors." She handed him a tablet that made his personal phone look like a child's toy. "This links to the building management system. You'll receive all work orders here, along with Miss Thornton's schedule, so you can plan maintenance around her meetings and commitments. That schedule is confidential. You don't discuss it with anyone, including other maintenance staff. Understood?" "Understood." "Miss Thornton values three things above all else." Catherine's voice carried the weight of gospel being delivered: discretion, efficiency, and invisibility. Your work should be seamless. She shouldn't have to think about whether the lights work or the temperature is comfortable. If she notices you at all, it should be because you've solved a problem before it became her problem. The irony of being told to be invisible by someone whose boss had personally promoted him wasn't lost on Cole. He kept his expression neutral and nodded. "Questions?" "1,000 of them. None he could actually voice." "No, ma'am." "Good. There's a staff briefing every morning at 6:45 in the main conference room. You're expected to attend. It covers the day's schedule and any VIP visits that might affect your work. Start your systems check at 7:30. Miss Thornton arrives between 8 and 8:30, and everything should be perfect before she walks through that door." Catherine paused, something in her expression shifting almost imperceptibly. "Miss Thornton doesn't make recommendations lightly, Mr. Sullivan. She saw something in you that made her believe you belong up here. I suggest you prove her right." Before Cole could respond, Catherine was gone, her departure as efficient as everything else about her. He stood alone in his new office, surrounded by the trappings of a life he'd never imagined, and wondered what exactly Vivian Thornton had seen when she looked at a maintenance worker who'd stumbled into her private moment. The first week passed in a blur of learning protocols and staying out of sight. Cole memorized the building management system, familiarized himself with every circuit breaker and HVAC control, discovered that the executive floor had more technology packed into a single level than the rest of the building combined. Smart glass that adjusted for light levels, climate controls that responded to occupancy sensors, conference room systems that cost more than luxury cars. And through it all, he caught only glimpses of her, a flash of mahogany hair as she strode past, her voice carrying through a conference room door, crisp with authority that made grown men take notes. Once, he was replacing a malfunctioning light fixture in the hallway when she emerged from a meeting and their eyes met for half a second before she looked away and continued walking. She gave no sign of recognition, no acknowledgement that he existed beyond his function as the person who kept her world running smoothly. It should have been a relief. Instead, that moment in her office, when he'd seen vulnerability crack through her armor, was an aberration, a mistake they were both pretending had never happened. The frosted glass door had closed on that possibility, and what remained was simple employer-employee dynamics with appropriate distance and appropriate expectations. But late at night, lying awake in his apartment that suddenly felt less cramped thanks to the breathing room in his budget, Cole couldn't stop thinking about the question that had haunted him since he signed those transfer papers. Not why she'd promoted him. He'd pieced that together from the timeline and the file access logs. She'd been watching him work, evaluating his competence, considering him for this position before the incident ever happened. The frosted door had been a test of character, and somehow he'd passed. What he couldn't figure out was the exhaustion he'd seen in her eyes when she'd said those 4 words. "I know you are." Like she'd recognized something in his desperation that resonated with her own hidden truths. Some kinship between a maintenance worker drowning in single parenthood and a CEO drowning in expectations she couldn't escape. The answer came on his 8th day, in a moment that redefined everything he thought he understood about boundaries and distance and the space between their separate worlds. It was late afternoon, almost 6, and the executive floor was emptying as people departed for dinner meetings or headed home to families and lives that existed beyond these walls. Cole was in the main conference room testing a video system that had glitched during a presentation that morning. The technology was sophisticated enough that the manual read like a foreign language, but he'd spent 2 hours breaking down each component until he found the faulty HDMI processor buried in the wall panel. He was on his back under the conference table, rewiring connections when he heard voices approaching, heels clicking against marble with purpose that suggested the conversation wasn't casual. "I don't care what the legal team says." Vivian's voice cut through the air like a blade honed on expensive education and sharper experience. "We're not settling." Derek knew exactly what he was doing when he violated that non-compete. Vivian, the optics alone, a male voice, older, trying for reason like someone used to being heard. The optics of backing down are worse. We set a precedent here. Every executive we've ever signed walks away thinking they can steal our clients and we'll just negotiate a settlement. The voices entered the conference room and Cole froze under the table, barely breathing. He could see expensive shoes now, Vivian's black heels, a man's polished Oxfords. The door closed with a soft click that felt like a prison lock, engaging. "You're being unreasonably aggressive about this." The man's voice carried weight, the kind that came from decades of boardroom victories. "Derek was your father's hire. Going after him publicly damages Harrison's legacy. My father's legacy is secured by the company's success, not by protecting executives who betray us. Or are you suggesting I should prioritize sentiment over strategy, Richard? I'm suggesting you remember that some of us have been with this company since before you were born. Your father trusted Derek. Perhaps you should consider whether my judgment has increased this company's value by 42% in 2 years. My judgment acquired Techline and Meridian when everyone said we were overextending. My judgment," she stopped abruptly, "is someone in here?" Cole's heart stopped. He'd been so still, barely breathing, but somehow she'd sensed him. "The maintenance technician," he heard Richard say, and Cole could hear the disdain dripping from every syllable. "Perhaps you should have him escorted out before we continue discussing confidential matters." Silence stretched for 3 beats of Cole's racing heart. Sullivan. Not a question, a statement. Vivian knew he was there. Cole slid out from under the table, tool bag in hand, his face burning with embarrassment and something else, the sick realization that he'd just overheard a conversation he had no business hearing. Richard Keller, he recognized now, one of the senior board members, silver hair and expensive suit projecting authority that expected deference. "I'm sorry, I was fixing the video system. I didn't mean to intrude on." "Did you hear our conversation?" Richard's demand came sharp, expectant of confession and consequence. "I heard voices." Cole met Vivian's eyes despite every instinct screaming at him to look away. "I didn't listen. It was a distinction without difference, and they all knew it. Richard's expression said he expected immediate dismissal, security called, possibly legal action for industrial espionage, or whatever charge rich people deployed against maintenance workers who overheard their private wars. But Vivian just studied Cole with that same unreadable intensity he'd seen in her office 2 weeks ago, like she was measuring him against some standard he didn't understand and probably couldn't meet. Finish your work, then leave. Yes, ma'am. Cole turned back to the video system with hands that shook, hyper-aware of the conversation continuing in low tones behind him. Every second felt like an eternity. When he finally packed up his tools and headed for the door, Richard was mid-sentence about shareholder concerns, and neither of them acknowledged Cole's departure. He made it to his small office and leaned against the closed door, pulse hammering. The smart thing would be to go home, forget what he'd heard, never mention it to anyone. Discretion, that's what Vivian valued, what she'd promoted him for. But the look in her eyes when she'd realized he was there hadn't been anger. It had been calculation, like she was testing him again, measuring him against some standard that had nothing to do with electrical systems and everything to do with what kind of man he was when nobody was watching. Around 8 that evening, when the executive floor was dark and silent, except for the glow of emergency lighting, his tablet pinged with a message. It came from Vivian's private email, sent directly to his work account. Your discretion is noted and appreciated. V.T. 7 words. No explanation, no context, but Cole stared at them until his eyes blurred, trying to decode the meaning underneath. She'd been testing him deliberately, or she'd simply seized an opportunity when it presented itself. Either way, she'd watched him overhear a confidential conversation and choose silence, and she'd acknowledged it. The following week, Vivian requested him by name for the first time. The work order came through his tablet at 2:37 in the afternoon. Temperature control malfunction in CEO office. Immediate response required. Cole grabbed his equipment and made it to Vivian's wing in under 8 minutes. Catherine intercepted him at the entrance, her expression tight with concern. She's been in back-to-back video conferences for 3 hours. The AC cut out 40 minutes ago and the room's getting uncomfortable. Fix it quickly and quietly. Vivian's office door stood open, and he could hear her voice as he approached, still crisp and controlled despite what had to be stifling heat inside. I understand your concerns about the timeline, David. What I need you to understand is that the board won't approve additional delays. We launch in 6 weeks regardless of... Cole slipped into the office, keeping to the perimeter, making himself as invisible as possible. The temperature was indeed uncomfortable, at least 78 degrees and climbing. Vivian sat behind her massive desk, facing a wall of screens showing various video conference participants. She didn't acknowledge his presence, but he saw her shoulders relax fractionally, tension easing just enough to be noticeable if you were watching for it. The thermostat was mounted behind a panel that matched the wall perfectly, designed to be invisible until you needed it. Cole opened it silently and ran diagnostics on his tablet. The problem revealed itself immediately. A failed sensor sending incorrect readings to the climate control system. He had a replacement in his bag, always carried extras of the most common failure points because prevention beat emergency response every time. We've been over this, Vivian continued, her voice carrying the particular patience of someone explaining something for the 3rd time to people who should have understood it the first. Marketing doesn't drive the launch schedule. Product readiness does. If your team can't deliver the campaign materials by week 4, we'll find someone who can. Cole worked in absolute silence, replacing the sensor, recalibrating the system, testing the response. Cool air began flowing through the vents within minutes. He allowed himself a glance toward Vivian and found her watching him in the reflection of her darkened screens, her eyes tracking his movements even as she verbally dismantled someone's excuses. Much better. Now that we can all think clearly again, let's discuss realistic deliverables. It wasn't about the temperature. She was talking to him, acknowledging the fix without breaking her focus on the meeting. Cole felt something shift in his chest, recognition of competence between two professionals who understood their roles, even if those roles existed in entirely different universes. He packed up his tools and left as quietly as he'd entered. 10 minutes later, another message appeared on his tablet. Efficient work. Thank you. 3 days after that, she asked for him again. A malfunctioning outlet in her private conference room discovered 15 minutes before a meeting with potential investors. Cole replaced the outlet in under 10 minutes while Vivian reviewed presentation materials at the table, her presence a constant weight in his peripheral vision. Then again, a flickering light above her desk that she mentioned disrupted her focus during late-night work sessions. A coffee maker in her private kitchen that refused to function. A loose door handle that caught on her sleeve. Small things, easily fixed. But each request came directly from her, bypassing the normal work order system, and each one felt like another layer of something being built between them. Not friendship exactly, not trust, but something more complicated, something that suggested Vivian Blackwell had recognized in him what he'd slowly begun to understand himself. Reliability wasn't just about fixing broken things. It was about anticipating needs before they became problems, about understanding patterns and rhythms, about making someone's difficult world just slightly easier without them having to ask. Cole began to see those patterns everywhere, noticed when the temperature in her wing fluctuated and adjusted it before she felt the change. Identified a glitch in the lighting system that caused a brief flicker every third day and replaced the timer module. Kept spare parts for every system she used regularly stored in his office for immediate access, because 10 minutes might be the standard, but 5 was better. And slowly, incrementally, the Ice Queen began to thaw in his presence. It started with simple acknowledgments, a nod when he arrived to fix something, a quiet thank you when he left, then actual words beyond professional courtesy. You're here early. Cole looked up from the smoke detector he was replacing to find Vivian standing in her office doorway, tablet in one hand and coffee in the other. It was 7:15 in the morning, 30 minutes before her first scheduled meeting. Wanted to finish before your 8:30 meeting, ma'am. Catherine mentioned you have investors coming in. You read the briefings. Not a question, but he heard approval underneath, subtle as morning light through those floor-to-ceiling windows. Helps me plan my work around your schedule. Vivian had been reviewing something on her tablet, but she looked up at that, studying him with those dark eyes that still made his pulse quicken in ways that had nothing to do with fear anymore. Most people on my staff do the minimum required and nothing more. Why don't you? The question caught him off guard. Cole secured the new smoke detector before answering, giving himself time to choose words carefully. I have a daughter. She deserves better than minimum effort. This job, what you did for me, giving me this position, it changed our lives. Seemed like the least I could do was earn it. Something flickered across Vivian's face, too quick to identify but real enough to make his breath catch. Your daughter. She's 9, you said. Yes, ma'am. Lily. The name felt intimate somehow, personal in a way that made him hesitate, but Vivian was watching him expectantly, waiting. She's in 4th grade, loves art, hates math homework, wants to be a veterinarian when she grows up. Just the two of you? Just us. Her mother left before she was born. It's been me and Lily against the world ever since. Vivian was quiet for a moment, her expression unreadable in that way she had, like curtains drawn across windows to keep people from seeing what was inside. That must be difficult. It's everything. Then, because she'd opened the door and something in her posture suggested she wanted him to walk through it. What about you? Is there? He stopped, realizing too late he was crossing a line maintenance workers didn't cross with CEOs, no matter how many private conversations they'd had, or how many times she'd thanked him for fixing her temperature controls. But Vivian smiled, a small, sad curve of her lips that transformed her face for just a second, made her look younger and more human and infinitely more lonely than any 28-year-old running an empire should ever be. No one. Building an empire doesn't leave much time for personal entanglements. And most people want something from me: power, connections, proximity to success. It becomes difficult to know what's real. The honesty in her voice startled him. This glimpse beneath armor that seemed designed to repel intimacy, like water off treated glass. I can't imagine what that's like, not trusting people's intentions. Can't you? Vivian's eyes held his, searching. You trusted Lily's mother. She left. Now you raise your daughter alone, working yourself to exhaustion to provide for her. I'd imagine trust is complicated for you too. She was right, and the recognition settled between them like furniture being moved into a previously empty room. Understanding that neither of them had expected to find here, in her office at 7:15 on a Tuesday morning, while he stood on a ladder replacing a smoke detector. I should finish this. His voice came out rougher than intended, scraped raw by vulnerability he hadn't planned on showing to anyone, least of all the woman who could fire him with 3 words and destroy the fragile stability he'd built for Lily. Yes, but she didn't leave. She stayed there working on her tablet while he completed the installation, and her presence felt less like surveillance and more like companionship. Like 2 people existing in the same space without needing to fill it with noise or performance. When he climbed down and packed his tools, she looked up one more time. Thank you, Cole. It was the first time she'd used his first name, and the sound of it in her voice rewired something in his brain, created connections he wasn't sure he wanted, and definitely didn't know how to handle. Anytime, Miss Thornton. He left before he could say something stupid, but he felt her watching him all the way to the door. And that awareness followed him through the rest of his day, like heat from a fire you'd stood too close to, pleasant and dangerous in equal measure. The day everything shifted started ordinarily enough. Cole arrived at 6:30 for the morning briefing, coffee in hand, prepared for another day of invisible efficiency. Catherine ran through the schedule with her usual precision: video conferences, department reviews, a site visit from a tech journalist, and an all-hands presentation at 4 in the main auditorium. The presentation is particularly important. Miss Thornton will announce the new product line. There will be press, investors, and all senior staff. Everything needs to be perfect. Cole made notes on his tablet, coordinating with the facilities team to ensure all executive floor systems would be stable during the event. Vivian would be under intense scrutiny, and the last thing she needed was a technical failure making her look unprepared in front of people already waiting for her to stumble. The morning proceeded smoothly. He handled routine maintenance, responded to a minor printer malfunction, replaced a burned-out LED in a conference room. Around 2, he decided to check the auditorium personally just to verify everything the facilities team had reported. The main auditorium seated 300 people and featured a stage with professional lighting, video screens, and sound systems sophisticated enough for concert venues. The facilities team had done good work. Everything looked pristine, technology tested and ready. Cole was about to leave when something made him look up at the lighting rig suspended above the stage. Years of maintenance work had trained his eyes to spot things that weren't quite right, subtle misalignments that suggested potential problems. One of the stage lights looked off-center, its mounting bracket slightly twisted in a way that triggered alarm bells in his experienced eye. He found a ladder and climbed up to inspect it. What he discovered made his blood run cold. The safety cable, the backup that prevented lights from falling if the main mount failed, was frayed nearly through. Not from age or wear, but from what looked like deliberate cutting. Someone had sawed through most of the cable, leaving just enough intact that it wouldn't be immediately obvious, but would fail under the right stress. And the main mounting bolt was loose, turned back several threads, held in place by friction alone. Cole's hands shook as he examined the setup with growing horror. This wasn't accident or neglect. This was sabotage. The light weighed at least 40 pounds. If it fell during the presentation, directly onto the stage where Vivian would be standing, He didn't let himself finish the thought. Working quickly, he secured the mounting bolt properly, tested the weight distribution, replaced the safety cable entirely. Then he checked every other light in the rig, found two more with loosened bolts, secured them all. By the time he finished, he'd been in the auditorium for 90 minutes, and his shirt was soaked with sweat that had nothing to do with physical exertion. The question burning in his mind was whether to report this. If this was deliberate sabotage, there were protocols, investigations, potential danger to Vivian that extended beyond a rigged light fixture. But he had no proof beyond his professional judgment. The frayed cable could theoretically be explained as wear. The loose bolts might be attributed to poor maintenance. And if he was wrong, if he raised alarms that led nowhere, he'd look paranoid or attention-seeking. He'd put himself directly in Vivian's line of sight in a way that violated everything she valued about him. She needed him to be invisible, to solve problems quietly, not create drama. Cole made his decision. He documented everything with photos on his tablet, secured the systems, and made a note to check them again before the presentation. Then he went back to the executive floor and tried to act like his heart wasn't racing with the certainty that someone had tried to kill Vivian Thornton, and he had no way to prove it without sounding crazy. At 3:30, Catherine sent a message asking him to verify the video feeds in the auditorium one final time. Cole went back down, checked the lights again, still secure, and confirmed all systems were operational. People were already filling the seats. Press photographers set up cameras. The energy in the room built like a gathering storm. Vivian arrived at 3:55, flanked by Catherine and two senior executives. She wore a deep blue suit that commanded attention without demanding it, hair pulled back severely, expression calm and confident. Cole watched from the shadows at the back of the auditorium as she took the stage, tested the microphone, surveyed the crowd with the control of someone who owned every room she entered. Their eyes met across the distance. Vivian's gaze held his for just a moment, something passing between them that might have been acknowledgement or might have been his imagination projecting hope onto professional courtesy. Then she turned her attention to her notes, and Cole forced himself to breathe. The presentation began. Vivian spoke with the kind of authority that made people lean forward, her voice carrying perfectly through the sound system he'd verified twice. She outlined quantum link AI with precision, fielded questions from journalists with sharp intelligence, commanded the stage like she'd been born to it. Cole stood near the lighting controls, watching not the presentation, but the equipment. The stage lights held steady. The video screens displayed perfectly. Everything was working exactly as it should, and he started to relax. Started to think maybe he'd been wrong. Maybe the damage he'd found was just neglect after all, coincidence and poor maintenance rather than malicious intent. Then, 40 minutes into the presentation, the light directly above center stage shifted. It was subtle, a slight rotation on its mount, but Cole saw it immediately. His blood turned to ice. Someone was in the lighting catwalk above the stage, a figure moving in the shadows where no one should be during an active presentation. He could see movement now, someone adjusting something he couldn't quite make out. The light shifted again, rotated further. The mount he'd fixed was holding, but now someone was actively working to override the safety measures he'd put in place. Cole moved before thinking, racing toward the stage access stairs on the opposite side of the auditorium. He had to get up there, had to stop whatever was happening. But the stairs were too far, and Vivian was directly under that light, still speaking, unaware of the danger gathering above her like a storm about to break. The light groaned, metal straining against compromised connections. "Get away from center stage!" Cole's voice carried across the auditorium, drawing attention from 300 people. "Now!" Vivian froze mid-sentence. Years of control kept her rooted to the spot, confusion and authority warring on her face. The light above her groaned again, louder this time. Cole didn't have time to explain or apologize or consider consequences. He launched himself onto the stage, grabbed Vivian around the waist, and threw both of them sideways with every ounce of strength he possessed. They hit the stage floor hard, Cole twisting to take the impact on his shoulder. Half a second later, 40 pounds of metal and glass crashed into the exact spot where Vivian had been standing, the mounting bracket finally giving way. The light exploded on impact with a sound like a gunshot. Shattered glass sprayed across the stage. Sparks flew from severed electrical connections. The crowd erupted in chaos, screaming, people running, security converging from all directions. But Cole only registered Vivian in his arms, her body pressed against his, her heart hammering so hard he could feel it through their clothes. Her dark eyes were wide with shock, her perfect composure shattered, and she was shaking like someone who just stared into the abyss and seen it stare back. "Are you hurt?" Cole demanded, his hands moving over her shoulders, her arms, checking for injuries with the desperate efficiency of someone who just watched death miss by inches. "Did the glass hit you?" "I'm fine." Vivian's voice trembled despite the words, control fracturing at the edges. How did you know?" "I'll explain later. Right now we need to—" Security surrounded them, pulling them apart, voices shouting questions and orders. Cole caught a glimpse of figures fleeing from the catwalk access, saw guards racing after them. Catherine was there suddenly, her professional mask cracked with genuine terror, helping Vivian to her feet. "I'm fine." Vivian's voice came louder now, authority returning even as her hands shook. "Everyone calm down. Clear the auditorium in an orderly fashion. Catherine, get security to—" "On it." Catherine was already coordinating on her phone, moving with the crisis management skills of someone who'd trained for disasters they'd hoped would never come. Vivian's eyes found Cole again. He was still on the stage floor, shoulders screaming where he'd absorbed their combined impact, glass scattered around him like diamonds. Blood ran from a cut on his arm where a shard had caught him during the fall. "You're bleeding." "It's nothing." "It's not nothing." She moved toward him, but Catherine intercepted her gently, physically placing herself between Vivian and the impulse to check on the maintenance worker who just saved her life. "We need to get you to a secure location until security sweeps the building. Please, Vivian." For a moment, Cole thought Vivian would refuse, would push past Catherine and come to him anyway. But she let Catherine guide her toward the exit, looking back at him one last time with an expression he couldn't read. Shock, gratitude, something deeper that made his breath catch, even as his vision swam from pain and adrenaline crash. Then she was gone, and Cole was surrounded by security personnel asking questions he barely heard, his mind replaying those seconds on a loop. The weight of Vivian in his arms, the terror in her eyes, the absolute certainty that if he'd been 1 second slower, she would have died. And somewhere in the chaos, Cole realized that invisible was no longer an option. He'd thrown himself into the spotlight to save her, and nothing between them would ever be the same. The security office on the second floor became command central within minutes of the auditorium evacuation. Cole sat in a hard plastic chair while a paramedic cleaned the gash on his forearm, the sting of antiseptic barely registering against the adrenaline still flooding his system. Around him, guards spoke in clipped tones into radios, coordinating a building-wide lockdown while reviewing security footage on a wall of monitors that showed every angle of the disaster that almost was. "You're lucky. Another inch and this would have needed stitches." Lucky wasn't the word Cole would have chosen. He felt like his entire body was vibrating at a frequency just below visible, his mind replaying those seconds on the stage over and over. The groan of metal, Vivian's body against his, the explosion of glass where she'd been standing moments before. Mr. Sullivan, James Webb, head of security, a former FBI agent with gray-streaked hair and eyes that had seen too many crimes to be shocked by much, pulled up a chair. His expression carried the gravity of someone about to ask questions that mattered more than politeness or comfort. "Walk me through what happened. Start with why you were checking the auditorium in the first place." Cole explained about the morning briefing, his decision to personally verify the systems, finding the frayed safety cable and loose mounting bolts. He showed Webb the photos on his tablet, timestamped from hours before the presentation, evidence of sabotage that made Webb's jaw tighten with each image. You fixed it, secured everything properly, so how did the light still fall? Someone was up in the catwalk during the presentation. I saw movement, saw them working on something. They must have loosened it again or found another way to compromise the mount. Webb's expression went from serious to granite hard. Did you see a face? Any identifying features? No, just a silhouette, dark clothes, moving fast. And you didn't report the initial sabotage. The question carried weight, not quite accusation, but close enough to make Cole's stomach twist. I considered it, but I had no proof it was deliberate. Could have been negligent maintenance, poor oversight. I documented everything, fixed the immediate danger, planned to monitor it. I didn't expect someone to actively interfere during the event itself. Webb studied him for a long moment, measuring something Cole couldn't identify. Your quick thinking saved Miss Thornton's life. I want to be clear about that, but this situation is now a criminal investigation, attempted murder, possibly corporate espionage. You'll need to make a formal statement. Everything you saw, everything you did, whatever you need. The door opened and Catherine appeared, her usual composure restored but strain visible around her eyes, like cracks in porcelain. Mr. Sullivan, Miss Thornton wants to see you. Now. Webb nodded permission. We'll continue this shortly. Don't leave the building. Cole followed Catherine through corridors now patrolled by additional security, past employees gathered in worried clusters, to the executive floor. The atmosphere up here was tense. Assistants speaking in hushed voices, senior executives behind closed doors, everyone processing the reality that their CEO had nearly died in front of 300 witnesses. Catherine led him not to Vivian's office, but to a smaller conference room he'd never entered before. Vivian stood at the window, her back to the door, still in the blue suit but with her hair down now, falling in waves across her shoulders. She didn't turn when they entered. Leave us. Catherine hesitated for the first time since Cole had known her. Vivian, security protocols suggest, I'm safe with Cole. Vivian's voice was soft but absolute, brooking no argument. Leave us, Catherine. The door closed with a click that seemed too loud in the silence. Cole stood just inside the room, unsure whether to speak or wait, his heart hammering against his ribs. The cut on his arm throbbed in time with his pulse. You tackled me. Vivian's voice came quiet, still facing the window, Boston spread out below her like a kingdom under siege. In front of 300 people. You grabbed me and threw us both to the ground. I'm sorry. I didn't have time to. Don't apologize. She turned and the expression on her face stopped his words. Her eyes were red-rimmed, carefully applied makeup smudged at the corners. Her carefully maintained mask was completely gone, replaced by something raw, inhuman, and utterly terrifying in its vulnerability. This wasn't the Ice Queen, wasn't the CEO who commanded boardrooms and dismantled competitors. This was a woman confronting her own mortality, stripped of every defense. You saved my life. Do you understand that? If you hadn't been there, if you hadn't seen that light shifting, I would be dead right now. The rawness in her voice hit him like a physical blow, made his own throat tight with emotions he didn't have names for. I saw the sabotage this afternoon, the frayed cable, the loose bolts. I fixed it, but I should have reported it immediately, should have insisted they cancel the presentation until... You did exactly what you should have done. Vivian crossed the room, stopping 3 feet from him, close enough that he could see she was still trembling, despite the authority she was trying to rebuild. You identified a threat, neutralized it, and stayed vigilant. When the danger evolved, you acted without hesitation. That's not something to apologize for. I'm just a maintenance tech. I fix broken things. I'm not... You're the man who saved my life. Vivian's eyes held his with an intensity that made breathing difficult. Don't tell me what you are or aren't, Cole Sullivan. I know exactly what you are. The way she said his name rewired something fundamental in his chest. Cole found himself taking a step closer, drawn by gravity he didn't understand and couldn't resist. What happened up there on the stage? That wasn't about maintaining your image or protecting the company. That was about you. Just you. And I would do it again without thinking twice. Vivian's breath caught, and for a moment Cole thought she might close the distance between them, might let whatever was building in this room finally break through all the barriers of professional distance and appropriate boundaries. But her phone buzzed, sharp and intrusive, and she pulled it from her pocket with hands that still shook. Security found evidence in the catwalk. She read the message, her expression shifting from vulnerable to focused in seconds. Tools, cut cables. They're reviewing all footage from the building. They think they can identify who it was. Do you know why someone would target you like this? A bitter smile crossed Vivian's face, there and gone like a match struck in darkness. I'm a 28-year-old woman running a multi-billion-dollar company in an industry dominated by men who think they deserve what I have. The list of people who'd benefit from my death is longer than I'd like to admit. That's not normal, Vivian. That's not acceptable. It's reality. And now I have to decide how to handle it. You show strength by staying alive. Everything else is secondary. She looked at him with something that might have been wonder, like he'd said something in a language she'd forgotten existed. You really believe that? I know what it's like to have someone depending on you. Cole thought of Lily, probably at Eleanor's apartment right now, blissfully unaware of how close she'd come to losing her father today. You have thousands of employees whose livelihoods depend on this company. You owe it to them to protect yourself. Is that the only reason? The employees? The question hung between them, but before Cole could answer, Webb appeared at the door, his expression grim. Miss Thornton, we have a situation. We've identified the individual in the catwalk, and there's something you need to see immediately. They moved to a larger conference room where security had set up a command center. On the main screen, frozen footage showed a man in dark maintenance coveralls accessing the catwalk 20 minutes before the presentation. The image quality was good enough to see his face clearly. Mid-40s, sharp features, familiar in a way that made Cole's stomach drop. His name is David Novak. Webb pulled up additional files. He's been with building maintenance for 8 months. Background check appeared clean, references verified. We just discovered his employment application used a false social security number belonging to someone who died 3 years ago. Someone planted him. Vivian's voice was tight, controlled fury barely contained beneath the surface. That's our assessment, but there's more. Webb pulled up another image, a screenshot of an email from an anonymous account. This was sent to 3 business journalists 40 minutes ago. Time to go out during your presentation. It claims you've been inflating revenue numbers to boost stock prices. The timing suggests whoever sent it expected you to be in no position to defend yourself. Cole felt sick. This wasn't just an assassination attempt. This was coordinated destruction. Kill Vivian, release damaging accusations, tank the company's value, all orchestrated with precision that spoke to significant resources and inside knowledge. The allegations are false. Vivian stated it flatly. Our books are audited quarterly by independent firms. But the accusation alone will damage investor confidence until we can prove otherwise. Not if you're standing in front of cameras tomorrow, very much alive, with security footage showing an attempted murder coordinated with fraudulent allegations. Webb's response came quick and certain. That's conspiracy, not whistleblowing. We need to find Novak and whoever's behind him. We're already tracking him. Detective Sarah Morrison from Boston PD has joined the investigation. But Miss Thornton, we need to discuss enhanced security measures. Before Webb could continue, his phone rang. He answered, listened for 10 seconds, and his expression changed completely. They've got him. Novak was apprehended at Logan trying to board a flight to Mexico. He's in custody. The next 12 hours moved with the relentless momentum of consequences, finally catching up to careful plans. Detective Morrison arrived with federal agents. The moment attempted murder, combined with securities fraud, it became a multi-agency investigation. Cole gave his formal statement 3 times, each iteration more detailed than the last, while Vivian did the same in a separate room. It was nearly midnight when Webb finally approached Cole in the security office break room, where he'd been waiting for clearance to leave. We got him to talk. Webb looked exhausted, but grimly satisfied. Novak had $50,000 in cash in his apartment and a burner phone with encrypted messages. Our tech team broke the encryption. The messages coordinate the entire operation: timing, method, the fake financial documents, everything. Who hired him? Webb pulled up a chair, his expression suggesting the answer was going to be worse than Cole expected. The money came from an offshore account. It took our financial forensics team 6 hours to trace it, but they found the source. The account was funded by liquidated stock options belonging to Derek Morrison. The name hit Cole like a fist to the gut. Derek Morrison, Chief Technology Officer. The man Vivian had argued with Richard Keller about in that overheard conversation weeks ago. The executive accused of violating his non-compete agreement. Cole had seen his photo in company directories. Pleasant face, warm smile, 12 years of loyal service to Harrison Thornton. Derek Morrison has been with his company since before Vivian took over. Why would he? We're still piecing together motive. Webb's voice carried the weight of implications not yet fully formed. But the evidence is conclusive. Bank records show 3 payments totaling $80,000 to Novak over 6 months. Phone records connect them. And we found something else. Morrison accessed building schematics and security protocols 2 weeks ago, right when the auditorium presentation was being planned. Where is he now? Home, presumably. We've had him under surveillance since we made the connection an hour ago. Detective Morrison is preparing arrest warrants, but she wanted to brief Ms. Thornton first. This is going to be complicated. Morrison was close to her father, worked directly with Harrison for over a decade. Cole found Vivian in her office despite the late hour, standing at those floor-to-ceiling windows that showed Boston sleeping beneath its blanket of lights. She didn't turn when he entered, and for a moment he just stood there watching her shoulders rise and fall with carefully controlled breathing. They told you. Not a question. Derek Morrison. Her voice came hollow, scraped clean of emotion through sheer force of will. The man who sat at my father's funeral and told me he believed in my vision for the company, who worked 18-hour days on Quantum Link AI, who I trusted with our most sensitive technology. I'm sorry. She laughed, sharp and bitter. Sorry. As if that means anything when you discover the people you trust are the ones trying to destroy you. Cole crossed the office until he stood beside her at the window. Not everyone you trust. I'm still here. Vivian turned to look at him then, really look at him, and what he saw in her eyes made his chest ache. Why? Why are you still here, Cole? You got your promotion, your salary increase, the health care for Lily. You could walk away from all this chaos, find a safer job where your boss isn't being targeted for murder. Because walking away from you isn't an option anymore. The confession hung in the air between them, impossible to take back and absolutely true. Vivian's breath caught, her eyes searching his face like she was looking for proof this was real, that he meant what he was saying. Cole, we can't. This is complicated. I'm your employer. There are power dynamics, and people will say you're using me or I'm taking advantage. I don't care what people say. His voice came rougher than intended, raw with everything he'd been holding back for weeks. I care about you. Not the CEO, not the company, not the salary or the benefits. You, the woman who works until exhaustion because she's terrified of failing people she'll never meet, who trusted me when she had every reason not to, who's so convinced she has to be perfect that she's forgotten how to be human. I don't know how to be anything else. Vivian's voice broke on the last word. tears finally spilling over despite her attempts to maintain control. "I don't know how to let someone in without it destroying everything." "Then let me show you." Cole reached up slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, and brushed the tears from her cheeks with his thumbs. Vivian's eyes closed at the contact, a shuddering breath escaping her lips. "What if this ends badly? What if I ruin it like I ruin everything eventually?" "Then we'll deal with it together." "But Vivian, look at me." She opened her eyes. "You're not going to ruin this. You're not going to fail. And you're not alone anymore." The kiss happened like gravity, inevitable and right. Vivian closed the distance between them, and Cole met her halfway, his hands finding her waist as her fingers tangled in his hair. It wasn't gentle or uncertain. It was desperate and fierce, and tasted like salt from tears and hope from something neither of them had dared to believe possible. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Vivian rested her forehead against his. "We still have to deal with Derek, and Richard Keller, and the entire board questioning my judgment, and every reporter who's going to dig into our relationship looking for scandal. I know, but we'll handle it, together." A knock at the door made them step apart, though not as far as they might have a week ago. Catherine entered with Detective Morrison, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and the bearing of someone who'd spent decades dealing with crimes that revealed the worst of human nature. "Miss Thornton, we're ready to move on Derek Morrison. The warrant's been approved. We'll execute it within the hour. I want to be there when you arrest him." Vivian's voice carried steel that admitted no argument. "That's not advisable. If Morrison realizes we're coming, he works for me, worked for me. I deserve to look him in the eye when he's arrested." Detective Morrison exchanged a glance with Webb, some silent communication passing between them. "Your building, your call. But you stay back. Let us handle the actual arrest." The confrontation happened in Morrison's own home, a modest colonial in Newton that spoke to middle-class comfort rather than the wealth someone planning corporate takeovers should possess. That detail alone suggested Morrison was a pawn rather than a mastermind, someone desperate enough to be bought, but not smart enough to demand the kind of money that would set him up for life. They arrived at 3 in the morning, a convoy of unmarked cars and Boston PD units that surrounded the house with professional efficiency. Cole stayed close to Vivian as they'd planned, positioned between her and any potential threat, though Webb's team had made it clear they didn't expect violence from a white-collar criminal caught off guard. Derek Morrison answered the door in a bathrobe, his face shifting from confusion to recognition to barely concealed panic in the space of seconds when he saw Vivian standing behind the police officers. "Vivian, what's going on?" "Derek Morrison, you're under arrest for attempted murder, conspiracy to commit murder, securities fraud, and criminal sabotage." Detective Morrison read him his rights while 2 officers moved to cuff him, but Morrison's eyes never left Vivian. "This is insane." "I didn't." "Vivian, tell them there's been a mistake. I would never hurt you. Your father trusted me." "My father is dead." Vivian's voice could have frozen fire. "And you tried to kill me. David Novak gave you up, Derek. The money trail, the phone records, the building schematics you accessed. We have everything." Morrison's face crumpled, the mask of pleasant competence falling away to reveal something desperate and small beneath. "You don't understand. I didn't have a choice. They were going to." "Who? Who hired you, Derek?" Vivian stepped forward despite Webb's hand on her arm, despite every protocol that said she should stay back. "Who wanted me dead badly enough to pay you $80,000? Morrison's laugh came bitter and broken. $80,000? They promised me $20 million. A CTO position when they acquired the company. I was supposed to be set for life, not just covering my gambling debts like some pathetic. He stopped, realizing he'd said too much. But Detective Morrison was already recording every word. "Who promised you $20 million, Mr. Morrison?" "Helix Corporation. Jonathan Helix himself." Morrison's resistance collapsed completely, words spilling out like water through a broken dam. He approached me 6 months ago, said Thornton Technologies was vulnerable with Harrison gone, said Vivian was incompetent, that the board would turn on her eventually. All I had to do was help speed up the timeline by killing me. Vivian's voice shook despite her attempts at control. It was supposed to look like an accident. The light falls, tragic but preventable. Evidence of poor leadership, failure to maintain basic safety. Company value crashes. Helix sweeps in with a buyout offer, and I keep my position in the merged entity. Morrison's eyes were wild now, desperate for understanding. I never wanted to hurt anyone, Vivian. I was drowning. 200,000 in gambling debts, my wife threatening to leave, and Helix offered me a way out. By murdering the daughter of the man who gave you everything. Cole's voice cut through Morrison's self-justification like a blade. You worked with Harrison Thornton for 12 years. He trusted you, and you sold out his daughter for money. Morrison flinched as if struck. I didn't think. The plan was supposed to work. Novak was supposed to be untraceable. The fake financial documents were supposed to bury her credibility, even if she survived. But then he glared at Cole with pure hatred. You had to play hero, had to ruin everything. Officers led Morrison away, still talking, still trying to justify what couldn't be justified. Vivian watched until the police cars disappeared, her expression unreadable in the pre-dawn darkness. Are you okay? Cole's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining with natural ease. I trusted him. Not the way I trust you, but I believed he was loyal to my father's legacy, to the company. And the whole time he was planning my death, like it was just another corporate restructuring. He was desperate and someone exploited that. It doesn't excuse what he did, but it explains it. Vivian turned to face him fully, Boston beginning to wake up behind her with the promise of a day that would bring press conferences and investor calls and 1,000 questions she'd have to answer. But for this moment, it was just the two of them standing in the aftermath of betrayal and survival. I love you. The words came simple and true, without hesitation. I don't know when it happened, maybe when you first walked through that glass door, maybe when you saved my life, maybe in all the small moments between. But I love you, Cole Sullivan, and I'm terrified of what that means. It means you're not alone anymore. It means when people try to destroy you, they have to go through me first. It means we face whatever comes next together. Cole pulled her close, and Vivian came willingly, resting her head against his chest, where she could hear his heartbeat, steady and sure. I love you too. Her voice came muffled against his shirt. God help us both, but I do. The sun was rising over Boston when they finally returned to Thornton Technologies, painting the glass tower in shades of gold and promise. The next weeks would be difficult, trials and testimony, board meetings and damage control, navigating a relationship that would be scrutinized by everyone with an opinion and a platform. But standing there with Vivian's hand in his, Cole felt something he hadn't experienced in 9 years of single parenthood and struggle. Certainty that they'd come through it intact. 6 months later, Cole stood in his apartment. Not the cramped 2-bedroom in Dorchester anymore, but a larger place in Cambridge that Vivian had helped him find. Close to better schools for Lily and the office both of them now work from. Lily burst through the door at 3:30, backpack bouncing, full of stories about her day that she couldn't wait to share. And then Miss Patterson said my drawing was so good it's going in the district art show. Can Vivian come, please? Of course she can, sweetheart. Cole caught his daughter in a hug, marveling at how much had changed and how much had stayed exactly the same. You can ask her yourself. She'll be here for dinner. Is she bringing that weird fancy cheese again? Lily wrinkled her nose in theatrical disgust. Probably. You know how she is about trying new things. Lily grinned, gap-toothed and delighted. That's okay. I like that about her. She's teaching me about being brave. Vivian arrived at 6, no longer in power suits, but jeans and a sweater. her hair loose around her shoulders in a way that still made Cole's heart skip. She'd stepped down as CEO 3 months ago, a decision that had shocked the business world, but made perfect sense to anyone who knew what she'd survived. Margaret Torres now ran Thornton Technologies, while Vivian focused on venture capital, funding startups run by people who reminded her of Cole, brilliant and capable, but lacking the pedigree that usually opened doors. "How was your day?" Vivian kissed him hello, then swept Lily into a hug that the 9-year-old returned with enthusiasm. "I made it into the art show," Lily announced proudly. "District-wide. My drawing of our family." "That's wonderful, sweetheart. Can I see it?" Lily produced the drawing from her backpack with a flourish. 3 figures stood together, a man, a woman, and a girl, in front of a building that was unmistakably Thornton Tower. Above them, written in Lily's careful printing, "My family who love each other." Vivian's eyes filled with tears, the kind she no longer tried to hide. "It's perfect. You're perfect. Both of you." Cole wrapped his arms around both of them, his daughter and the woman who'd walked through a glass door into his life and changed everything. Outside the window, Boston continued its relentless motion, but here in this moment, they'd found something more valuable than empires or promotions or any measure of success the world might recognize. They'd found each other. And that, Cole thought, pulling them closer, was everything they needed.